It may seem different, but at its core, this is the belated TennoCon video. In this first part of a two-part series, I want to discuss two highly anticipated Warframe updates, Empyrean and the Duviri Paradox. For the sake of convenience, I'll refer to them as Railjack and Duviri. I want to discuss why I believe that these updates failed to some capacity, both in development and reception. These failures will be listed separately, but are very much connected to one another. Interestingly, I think that the difficulties these updates faced are also quite similar, so for a fair bit of this video I'll be speaking quite generally. With that being said, let's get started. I think the biggest reason that these updates weren't as fun or stood out as much as they should have is due to there being a lot of cut content. If you were to watch the Tenno live panel of TennoCon 2018, you'd see that Railjacks were initially going to have compatibility with open landscapes, facilities like those on the Orbiter, and a much more intricate command system. It's a list of only 3 features, but these features would have significantly changed the way in which players interacted with their Railjacks. It could have acted as a substitute for the Orbiter, allowing players to move seamlessly from one mission to the next without having to repeatedly extract and restart a mission. Not only that, but having access to an arsenal during a mission would also completely change how loadouts would function. Imagine it, instead of carrying as much utility and as many damage types as possible, you could now specialize in a particular role. If the mission's requirements changed, you would be able to react accordingly, switching mods, frames, weapons, and more to suit the needs of the mission. Need to swap from your Corpus build to your Grineer one? You can do so on the upgrade screen. The team's Wisp was host migrated and got so frustrated he logged off the game? No problem, now you can swap and make up for it. Struggling for energy? Just swap to Xeneric and slot Arcane Energize. The benefit from a Railjack arsenal alone would be virtually limitless. In effect, this cut Railjack feature would have eroded the barrier between Warframe's fast-paced, chaotic gunplay and its strategic, more thought-out modding and building system. The entire Warframe gameplay experience would have become totally streamlined. But of course, these features never quite came to pass. What this led to was Railjack being restricted to its own category of Proxima missions. Effectively, you would have to go out of your way to play Railjack. And this doesn't really happen often, considering there is very little incentive to do so. At this stage, it's been left to the wayside. Duviri was in a similar situation. Looking at the demo from 2022, we see an Orreworm that hunts you constantly, Matoliths that act as save points, and a spin on Warframe's death system that surrendered control of the Drifter's life to Dominus Thrax. Once again, these features essentially define Duviri and its intended playstyle. Runs would begin by playing evasively, keeping an eye on the Orreworm that would constantly hunt you. In fact, that's why Duviri has such an intricate cave system. They were meant to act as emergency hiding spots if the Orreworm caught you off guard. You would roam around the map, activating Matoliths to restore the colour and life in the world of Duviri. Slowly but surely, you would seize control as Dominus Thrax made his disapproval clear through dialogue. Duviri missions would call for mobility and strategy as you slowly grew powerful enough to defeat the Orreworm. I still wish you'd actually kill the Orreworm at the end instead of it just flying off in the distance, because it's always been very unsatisfying. But I digress. In its current state, nothing in Duviri can stop you once you've acquired just several decrees. You're far too tanky and deal far too much damage for the Dax to be considered a real threat. Activities in combat are fun enough on their own, but the way Duviri currently operates overall makes it far too easy and not engaging enough. So, like Railjack, all the cut content from Duviri that would have made it really stand out never saw the light of day, and so they ended up being somewhat disappointing. On to the next issue. If you have any experience with Warframe, then you know about the bugs. Spaghetti code lies all throughout the game, which is likely due to Warframe's age paired with the sheer amount of code piled on, one update after another. These 2 updates are no different, and in fact, they might be the worst for it. Railjack launched in a horribly broken state that wasn't addressed until after the holiday period. While not as bad, Duviri also had quite the rough opening weekend. Take Kaith races for example. They were somehow so broken that they were removed on day 2 and didn't return until months later. It's especially weird considering they function identically to the K-Drive races in the Orb Valis and Cambion Drift. The point is, first impressions last. When you play Railjack on day 1 and struggle to just complete a mission, you write it off. When you're running a Duviri spiral and the main objective disappears from the world, you give up and go farm the circuit. These troublesome launches meant a significant portion of the player base weren't really keen to return. What's worse is that they're still buggy. Like when you swing at an enemy who freezes in place only for you to get staggered. Or if you're a client in any Railjack mission. Like I said, all of Warframe is buggy, but the fact that these 2 expansions shipped in unplayable states and remain broken to this day means that players are especially disinterested. I'm not saying that you shouldn't like Railjack or Duviri. In fact, it's better that you do. It means you have more to enjoy. I just think that the sheer bugginess of both updates has really damaged the experience for many players, myself included. This leads us quite well into the next point. Railjack and Duviri are 2 of Warframe's biggest ever updates, and the inclusion of cut content would have made them even bigger. Now, these being large updates isn't the issue. The problem lies in the fact that they are so far removed from conventional Warframe that they cannot be given support without development shifting from the core Warframe experience. And of course, that is and what should take priority. Take Railjack for example. The most recent meaningful update to that was the addition of the Corpus Proxima missions, and even that was just regular missions with Railjack slapped onto the start. Duviri had the addition of Kulovo and his island, which was great. But what about the future? I mean, it's been 3.5 years since Railjack was last updated, and over a year since Kulovo was added. The point is, there's this sort of conflict between these expansions and regular Warframe that means it can only be one or the other receiving meaningful content. This leads us very well into the final point. Suppose that Duviri received an overhaul where cut content was reintroduced, and changes were made to the combat and drifter intrinsics. I'm almost certain that many players would not have any interest in it. I think that's because both Railjack and Duviri are just too different from the conventional Warframe experience, especially Duviri. It trades Warframe's beloved movement and gunplay for slower paced, melee focused combat. I don't really have a problem with this. Variety is important, especially for a game as extensive as Warframe. The problem is that it just wasn't executed well enough. On top of not having a strong target audience, Duviri lost popularity quickly. Railjack isn't as cumbersome when it comes to its gameplay, but as we spoke about earlier in the video, it just didn't work out the way it was supposed to, and plays pretty awkwardly in its current state. To summarise, I believe that Railjack and Duviri, 2 of Warframe's biggest updates, failed to meet the ambitions of developers and the satisfaction of players, for the 4 reasons discussed. 1. A majority of content which largely contributed to both their gameplay and their appeal were cut and never made the final launches. 2. Bug-ridden launches severely hurt launch day impressions and continue to hurt gameplay experiences years later. 3. These updates were too ambitious to the point that they cannot receive meaningful support without taking the focus away from the core Warframe experience. And 4. They are too far removed from what the majority of Warframe's player base expects from a Warframe update. The result of this, as well as the previous points mentioned, means that their popularity is quite low. Ultimately, this is just my opinion. I know that the cut content and sheer amount of bugs have hurt my experiences, but it might not be the same for everyone. So then, how does this discussion continue in the second part of this 2-part series? I'm so glad you asked. I want to compare these updates to the upcoming, highly anticipated Warframe 1999 and see if it'll succeed where these updates failed. I don't want to make any real verdict until I've actually played it. But what do you guys think of Railjack and Duviri in their current states, and how often do you actually play them? Is it out of necessity, like for farming, or do you just enjoy playing them? I'd like to discuss that in the comments. And that is just about everything I have to say. So, until next time.